are in our 2011 Chevy Silverado 3500 four-wheel drive Duramax diesel, obviously, dually with a long bed, and we've got our 48-foot Exus car hauler hooked up to it, hitched up to it, and we're going through the mountains of Pennsylvania on I-76, Pennsylvania Turnpike. And you know, this is just a quick video to show you how if you don't have a truck with an exhaust brake and you expect to do any amount of towing, any amount of traveling through states that have mountains, you know, if you go through the Appalachians, if you go through the Rocky Mountains, if you go through the Sierra Nevadas in California, if you go through anything but completely flat ground, you must have a truck with an engine brake, because it's a night and day difference. We've got 3 trucks, actually. We've got an F-150, we've got a Dodge 3500, it's a 2003 with the 5.9 Cummins. It's not a dually, it's a 3500 with a long bed, 2-wheel drive. Great truck in a lot of ways, great truck in a whole lot of ways, and it checks off almost all the boxes. You know, something we care about a lot, the steering is tight. Dodge in that generation made, you know, the generation that started in 03 and went to 09 for the heavy duty Dodge is the 2500 and 3500. Their 2-wheel drive heavy duty Ram had extremely good steering, a really tight front end because it was an independent front suspension, and it had rack and pinion steering. And you know, if you grew up driving a car like that or a truck like that, you can't live without that. You know, compared to the 4-wheel drive Dodge heavy duty, which has a straight axle, and the Super Duty Ford, which has a straight axle, it is absolutely terrible in terms of the amount of steering feel and how precise it is and how easy it is to steer and control the vehicle and then control a heavy trailer. But the big limitation that Dodge has is that it does not have an exhaust brake. So you see the sign there, a steep grade for the next 6 miles. This Duramax, which we got recently, it's a 2011, it's the LML Duramax. And look what it's doing. We set the cruise at 65, we're going downhill. We've got our heavy trailer hitched up to it. And usually when you're going downhill, down a pretty steep grade, with a diesel, it will try to get away from you, because diesels don't have natural engine braking the way a gasoline engine does. Diesels don't have a throttle valve that can shut off the airflow into the engine or severely restrict it. And that's how gasoline engines do their engine braking. You know, you let off the gas and you downshift to a low gear, and you know, there's a severely restricted intake, and as a result the engine is, you know, essentially gasping for breath. And it's almost the opposite of exhaust back pressure. It has to work really, really hard to suck in that air through a closed throttle valve, and that restriction creates the engine braking, which slows your vehicle down on a steep hill. On a diesel, again, because they don't have a throttle valve, the only way to create a braking effect like that is with what's called an exhaust brake. And trucks, you know, 18-wheelers have what's called a Jake brake, and you can hear it because it makes a very, very loud noise when it's slowing the truck down. And in fact, they outlaw it in like urban areas, you know, when you're on the interstate driving through a city. They say no exhaust braking permitted. Well, the Duramax diesel has an exhaust brake that doesn't make any noise, and it came out in 2011 when the LML series was introduced. And what it does is that it's got a variable vane turbocharger, and it's got vanes that control the flow of exhaust into and around the turbine. And so, it can adjust the characteristics, the geometry of that turbocharger. And when you're making power, for instance, and you start off from idle, the vanes are closed really tightly, wrapped really tightly around the turbine, and that is so the maximum amount of exhaust can flow directly onto it and get it spinning and get it spooled up, so it starts to generate boost at a very low RPM. And it's actually kind of a small turbo. And the reason why they put a small turbo in is so that when you want to slow the truck down, going down a steep grade like we are now, the vanes around that turbine, they will start to open up as you rev the engine in order to allow more exhaust to flow through the turbo once it's up and running, once it's spinning and generating boost. But when you want to slow the truck down and you want to generate engine braking, what those vanes do is that they clamp down tightly around the turbine as if the engine was idling, except that it's turning 1500 or 2000 or 3000 RPM. And so that clamping down of the vanes around the turbine creates a massive amount of back pressure in the exhaust. And the back pressure means that the engine has to pump extremely hard to push that exhaust through the turbo, and that's what creates the engine braking. And so again, the point of this video is to show you, when you're going through miles and miles, in this case I think 6 miles of steep downhill grades, you don't want your truck to be trying to get away from you. It's not going to do you any good to downshift the way it is with a gas engine, because it doesn't matter if you turn in 1500 or 2500 or 3000 or however fast the engine will turn, there's still not going to be back pressure unless you have an exhaust brake. And so, people out there who are trying to decide which Duramax to get, you can spend days and weeks and months reading about them, and all these people love the LBZ Duramax. People will not stop talking about how much they love the LBZ. And the LBZ came out in 2006, and it lasted a year and a half, and by the middle of 2007 it was gone. But that's considered the golden age of the Duramax, because it was the last Duramax that did not have all that emissions crap on it, stuff on it, that the EPA required starting in the middle of 2007. It doesn't have a DPF, the diesel particulate filter, and it doesn't have the DEF system, diesel exhaust fluid, and it doesn't have any of that stuff. And so it's a lot simpler of an engine. The less, the fewer systems and complexity there is on it, the less stuff there is to break down. But the problem with the LBZ, first of all, it doesn't have that exhaust brake on it. And again, if you do a lot of towing and you're towing heavy loads, we were loaded to just under 26,000 pounds with the load we just delivered at DLA in New Cumberland. 13 tons. You do not want to be going up and down steep mountain grades loaded to 13 tons without the ability to slow yourself down effectively. Because when you don't have an exhaust brake, your only alternative is to use the service brakes, the mechanical brakes, and you will cook your brakes, and then they're done, and they'll be worn out, and you'll smell them, and the brake pads will get glazed, and your rotors will get warped, and then they're useless, and you're talking about a $500 or $1,000 brake job, or worse yet, your brakes are just going to fail on you when you need them the most. So, as much as we appreciate a simple engine, we love our Cummins diesel, it's about as simple as it gets. The fatal flaw with all these earlier diesel engines that everybody loves, that everybody can't stop talking about, is that they do not have an exhaust brake built in from the factory. You can get an aftermarket exhaust brake installed, and then you got some company's product that you're hoping will work properly. But then you're probably going to have a manual switch that's going to engage it, and then who knows how well calibrated it is, and it's not going to work in conjunction with the engine and the transmission to control the vehicle. I mean, the other problem with that LBZ is that it's in a truck that originally was released in, what, 99? Give or take. So, what is it now? 2021. That truck, the frame, the body, that's a 22-year-old design. And the interior, the interior's kind of cheap. The materials aren't that good. If you got leather seats, they're falling apart. All the switches and all that stuff, it's just kind of junky, the body of the truck, it looks fine. There's nothing wrong with it. But GM has only recently begun producing high quality products. For our part, we would rather not be driving a 22-year-old GM product, even a truck. And the trucks tend to have higher quality than the cars. Late 90s GM quality. It wasn't really where you wanted it to be. So, again, long story short, you got to have a factory exhaust brake. This switch right here activates it, or arms it, we should say, enables it, and then the computer will decide when to use it in conjunction with the transmission. You put the transmission in tow haul mode. That's that little picture of a trailer there. The Allison 6-speed. And the Allison is a great transmission. It's a fantastic transmission. And then you just set the cruise control. And if you want to go downhill at 60 miles an hour, it will make sure you stay at 60 miles an hour. And you can get through a 10-hour drive, a 12-hour drive, without having to ride the brakes when you're going downhill. You set the cruise at 60, and it will use the exhaust brake as needed. It will downshift as needed. And downshifting with the exhaust brake, what that does? That just generates a ton more airflow, into and out of the engine. And then that's a lot more back pressure that turbo can create for you using the vanes. And it all happens automatically. You got cruise control going up the hill. It'll downshift as needed. Cruise control going down the hill. Again, steep grades the next 5 miles. You don't have to think, okay, am I in 6th gear? Well, let's put it down into 5th. You don't have to get on those manual gear control buttons ever. You just set the cruise, and it will choose the right gear to be in, and it'll choose how much exhaust brake to use to keep you at 60 or 65 or whatever you desire to be at. And I don't mean to rattle on and on about it, but it really is life-changing. If you've taken a heavy trailer through the Appalachians, like on I-70, 76, or I-80, what have you, that is treacherous, and you don't want to be taking your life into your hands every time you go east or west on I-76. You want it to be comfortable, and you want it to be not a dramatic, death-defying event. Going through the Rockies? No, absolutely not. We've done it once in our Cummins, out and back on I-70 through Colorado, Utah, and then I-15 down through, Vegas and into California. That is not a pleasant experience. With that truck, as much as we love that truck, once you get a truck with an exhaust brake from the factory, and then the trailer brake controller, it's not using the trailer brakes unless you get on the brake pedal, because most of the time that exhaust brake has got you covered. You can feel it now. We're going down a section that would lead the Dodge into a very bad state. And in the Pennsylvania Turnpike, you got all these tight left and right turns. It's not a pleasant experience. You got a family with you. Maybe you're towing a camper. You don't want want your family and your kids to be experiencing that white knuckle ride. I mean, unless you're like sadistic, unless you get a kick out of that kind of thing, And watch the RPMs. It's generating enough braking power at 1500. It doesn't even need a downshift. But then, should you decide you need to slow down in a hurry, it'll downshift for you and generate a ton more back pressure. And then you don't need to keep riding the brakes. You just get on the brakes briefly. It knows you're trying to slow down. It'll downshift, and it's got you covered. Again, life changing. Not to make it sound too dramatic. But anything you can do to make your life easier and cut down on the risk is worth it. Even buying a newer diesel with all that emissions crap on it, it's worth it just for the peace of mind. That you're not going to be fighting with the brake pedal and, hoping that you got the trailer brakes calibrated so that the trailer brakes don't lock up and bring the trailer around on you and start fishtailing and jackknifing and all that stuff. You don't need that in your life. Guys in there raced out Subarus, or what is that, a Ford Focus, and these guys will be cutting in and out and weaving through traffic, and that creates an extra layer of complexity and hazard you got to deal with, because a lot of trucks will be in the left lane, and then these guys will be getting all agitated and starting to cut through, and cut you off. And they couldn't care less about how long your stopping distance is. They got to get past that dude in the left lane because they're in a rush to get somewhere, and then you're having to react as a consequence. So there it is, the Duramax diesel, 2011. The LML ran from 11 to I guess 2016, because they redid the body style in 2015. Carried over the engine for 2 more years, 2015 and 16. And then in 2017, Chevy produced another brand new engine, and that was called the L5P, which had a very, very substantial increase in power and torque. And we haven't heard really any bad things about it. They might have even fixed the CP4 problem that the LML has, which is the high pressure fuel pump, the injection pump, made by Bosch in Germany, which has a nasty habit of self-destructing because American fuel doesn't provide the amount of lubrication that it needs, since it was made for European fuel. And then your CP4 gets a little bit of water in it, or it gets some dirty fuel, and the tolerances, it's made so tightly, and it has to generate so much pressure, 36,000 psi in the high pressure fuel lines, that any little impurity in the fuel, or you forgot to change the filter, and then your CP4 potentially could die catastrophically on you. And in the course of going out, it will shower your entire fuel system, including all those high pressure lines and injectors and return lines and everything else, with little metal particles, and ruin your entire fuel system. And then you're paying $10,000 just to get back to where you were before. And off the top of my head, I'm not sure if the L5P fixed that problem, but we weren't going to get an L5P anyway, because we wouldn't buy a truck that's that new. That's from 2017, 18, 19. We wouldn't buy that new of a truck, because it starts out at 80,000 when it's brand new, and maybe it's only 50,000 when it's 3 or 4 years old. That's still too much to pay for a truck that isn't really substantially revolutionary any better than this one, which is a 2011. This one has everything you need to do everything that you need to do. Like, there is not a newer truck that has anything we wish we had. You know, the newer Chevys are just absolutely hideous in terms of their appearance. And the Fords, you know, we've driven a couple Super Duties, you know, a bunch of Super Duties, and the problem we have with the Ford is that it's got that straight axle in the front, and you know, we don't want to be driving a truck that has straight axle, you know, a straight axle in the front suspension, because the steering is terrible. Now, if they were to make a Super Duty with the onboard power that the F-150 has, you know, which can run your HVAC and all the appliances and stuff in your camper, and it had the 360 assist or whatever that is, you know, that will keep it in the lane, that basically drives it, that's another story. But that hasn't happened yet. So for the foreseeable future, this truck is all we need. Power and torque and fuel economy, and in terms of handling and performance.